When Ethiopia first announced that it intended to pursue nuclear energy, many dismissed the idea as symbolic rhetoric, a nation speaking big words without the capacity to deliver on them. But over the past few years, Ethiopia has defied expectations, moved quietly, and built momentum until now, when the world is beginning to realize that something profound is happening in the Horn of Africa. Ethiopia has effectively broken every unwritten rule about which countries are allowed to possess nuclear power. And it has done so in a way that exposes the inequities, double standards, and fragile balances of the global order. To understand how this moment arrived, one must trace Ethiopia's history, the global architecture of nuclear governance, and the political, strategic, and developmental stakes that have converged into this astonishing turn. The story of nuclear energy is not just about reactors and uranium. It is about who is trusted with transformative technologies, who controls the levers of power, and who is permitted to challenge the status quo. Since the end of the Second World War, the nuclear club has been tightly guarded. The United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom established themselves as the recognized nuclear powers under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, while others who attempted to break into the circle, such as India, Pakistan, Israel, or North Korea, did so through controversial or outright defiant paths. For decades, developing nations were told that nuclear power was dangerous in their hands, that they lacked the institutional strength to ensure safety, or that they might misuse civilian reactors as cover for weapons programs. This global system created a hierarchy where the North controlled the atom, while the South was expected to remain dependent on fossil fuels, hydro projects, or renewable technologies that kept them tied to Western financing and expertise. Ethiopia's decision to enter this domain is therefore far more than a technical step. It is a political earthquake for a country that has endured famine, conflict, sanctions, and international skepticism, declaring a move into nuclear energy signals confidence, defiance, and a determination to write its own future. Ethiopia, long dismissed as a periphery state, is signaling that it wants to play in the arena of great powers. And in doing so, it has set off alarms across Western capitals, especially because the partners helping Ethiopia are not the traditional suppliers. Russia's Rosatom and China's state nuclear corporations are at the forefront of this partnership, reshaping not just Ethiopia's domestic energy map, but the very fabric of nuclear geopolitics. The West has long argued that nuclear energy requires stability, rule of law, and institutional maturity. Ethiopia, however, is in the middle of political transformation, recovering from civil war and navigating fragile ethnic balances. Critics argue that this makes it an unsuitable candidate. Yet supporters counter that this is precisely why nuclear power matters for Ethiopia. The nation has one of the fastest growing populations on the continent, with over 120 million people and an energy grid incapable of meeting future demand. Hydroelectric dams like the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam have expanded capacity, but dependence on the Nile waters has introduced vulnerability, political friction, and environmental limits. Wind and solar can add resilience, but cannot yet meet industrial demand at scale. Nuclear power, therefore, represents not just prestige, but a strategic solution to long-term energy security. Ethiopia's leaders are framing the decision as an act of sovereignty. If developed nations could harness the atom to escape energy poverty, why should Africa remain perpetually excluded? This framing exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of the global order. Nations such as the United States or France encourage renewables in Africa, but simultaneously rely heavily on nuclear domestically. France, for example, gets over 70% of its electricity from nuclear plants, while urging African nations to avoid the same path. The double standard is glaring, and Ethiopia's challenge throws it into the open. By seeking nuclear energy, Ethiopia is saying that Africa should no longer be confined to the technologies approved by others. It should chart its own path, even if it unsettles the existing hierarchy. The technical and diplomatic maneuvers Ethiopia has undertaken are equally telling. Addis Ababa signed agreements with Russia to develop nuclear infrastructure, training, and regulatory bodies. Ethiopian students have been sent abroad for nuclear science education, while Rosatom has pledged to build research reactors as a precursor to power generation. China, too, has expressed interest in supporting Ethiopia's nuclear ambitions, particularly in financing and construction. These moves are not just about energy. They are about aligning Ethiopia with an alternative global order, one less dependent on Western institutions and more tied to the multipolar vision promoted by Moscow and Beijing. For the West, this is deeply unsettling. The International Atomic Energy Agency is now caught in a delicate position. If it denies Ethiopia technical support, it risks accusations of bias and double standards. If it provides support, it legitimizes a shift that could see Africa emerge as a serious nuclear player. The symbolism of Ethiopia's rise in nuclear discussions cannot be overstated. This is a nation that embodies resilience, having resisted colonization, endured occupation, and struggled through cycles of war and reform. To see Ethiopia now on the path to mastering nuclear energy is to witness a rewriting of narratives. Africa as a technological leader, not merely a recipient of aid. And this symbolism matters profoundly to other African nations. If Ethiopia succeeds, it will embolden Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya to accelerate their nuclear ambitions. Already, Nigeria has discussed similar partnerships with Rosatom, while South Africa remains the continent's only nation with operational nuclear power. Ethiopia's entry adds weight to the African Union's collective push for technological sovereignty. The message is simple but powerful. Africa should not only export raw uranium, it should also master the atom for its own development. Naturally, the backlash is fierce. Western think tanks warn of proliferation risks, pointing to Ethiopia's political instability and lack of established regulatory culture. They caution that reactors in fragile states could be vulnerable to sabotage, terrorism, or misuse. Yet critics of this view argue that such warnings are often a mask for geopolitical interests. After all, the same voices were silent when Saudi Arabia sought nuclear deals or when nations with close Western ties pursued reactors without facing the same scrutiny. Ethiopia, by contrast, is targeted precisely because it has chosen to partner with Russia and China, thereby challenging Western monopoly over nuclear technology. The fear is not just about safety. It is about influence. Who controls Africa's nuclear future? Washington, Paris, or Moscow and Beijing? The Ethiopian government has handled this with calculated rhetoric. Officials frame the nuclear program as purely civilian, emphasizing its necessity for development, medical research, and scientific advancement. They argue that Ethiopia has no intention of pursuing nuclear weapons and is fully committed to the safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. By maintaining this position, Ethiopia aims to project responsibility and legitimacy, even as it quietly breaks through invisible barriers that have long restricted African nations. The optics are powerful, a nation rising from conflict, poverty, and external pressure, now positioning itself as a pioneer in Africa's technological transformation. The implications stretch far beyond energy. Nuclear power plants require complex ecosystems of expertise, industry, and governance. Building such systems will force Ethiopia to develop new educational institutions, technical industries, and safety regimes. This creates a ripple effect across its economy, raising standards in engineering, medicine, and environmental sciences. The investment in nuclear is therefore not just about electricity. It is about modernizing the entire state apparatus. For a nation seeking to leapfrog into middle-income status, this is invaluable. And for Africa as a whole, Ethiopia's move sets a precedent. Nuclear power is not beyond reach, and the barriers are political, not technical. But it also raises tensions with neighbors. Egypt, already entangled in disputes with Ethiopia over the Grand Renaissance Dam, now views the nuclear move with suspicion. Cairo worries that a nuclear-capable Ethiopia, even under civilian pretexts, alters the regional balance of power. Sudan, fragile and unstable, fears spillover effects. Western allies, such as the United States, quietly encourage restraint. But Ethiopia appears determined to move forward regardless of external pressure. This determination itself is part of the story, a nation asserting that it will no longer be lectured about what it can or cannot pursue. For Ethiopians, this is a question of dignity as much as development. The global energy transition also contextualizes Ethiopia's move. As the world shifts away from fossil fuels, nuclear power has regained relevance as a low-carbon baseload option. Nations from Asia to the Middle East are investing heavily in reactors, seeing them as indispensable for balancing renewable growth. Ethiopia's decision to join this wave is therefore timely. It is not an outlier, but part of a broader global trend. What makes it unique is the audacity of its position in the hierarchy. A country not expected to enter this space has now done so, breaking the unspoken rule that Africa should remain technologically dependent. As Ethiopia moves forward, it will face enormous challenges, financing multi-billion-dollar reactors, building regulatory capacity, ensuring political stability, and winning domestic trust. Yet, the very fact that it has reached this stage is transformative. Even if progress is slow, the psychological impact has already been achieved. Africa can enter the nuclear age on its own terms. Ethiopia has changed the conversation from whether Africa should have nuclear power to how it can responsibly manage it. The West is now confronted with a dilemma. It can continue to resist and stigmatize Ethiopia's nuclear ambitions, risking further alienation of African nations, or it can adapt to a new reality where Africa asserts its right to technological sovereignty. Either way, Ethiopia has exposed the fragility of a system built on exclusion. The old rules no longer hold. A country long dismissed as too unstable, too poor, and too divided has just declared that it will decide its own destiny. That declaration reverberates far beyond Addis Ababa. It echoes across a continent that is tired of waiting for permission to advance. Ethiopia's journey into nuclear energy is thus not only about science or technology. It is about power, dignity, and the future of global order. It is about who writes the rules and who dares to break them. And in breaking them, Ethiopia has opened a door that others will surely walk through. The atom has once again become political, and Africa is no longer on the sidelines. Ethiopia, with all its flaws and struggles, has dared to claim a seat at the nuclear table. Whether the world welcomes or resists, the reality has changed. The rules of the nuclear game will never be the same again.